Just in case you somehow missed the news, you should probably know that Red Bull team principal and CEO Christian Horner has been removed from his positions at the team. The 51-year-old had been in charge of the Formula One team since their inception in 2005, leading them to 8 Drivers' Championships and 6 Constructors' titles. But recent problems within Red Bull have made his tenure untenable. Nonetheless, it came as a shock to everyone when, on Wednesday, he turned up at the Red Bull factory to give a speech announcing his immediate departure from the team. Now, the future of Red Bull racing lies with Laurent Mekies, who steps up from the racing bulls to lead Red Bull for the rest of this season and presumably into the new regulations. The team has never been without Christian Horner, and in 2026, when they create their own engine for the very first time, it's going to be their biggest season ever, and I think it's fair to say that the future of Red Bull has never been less certain. Today, I'm going to talk about where the team go from here, what we should expect in the next season and beyond, and why all of this is probably bad for Red Bull. But before I talk about any of that, I need to discuss the reasons behind Horner's exit, because it's in the reasons that the key to the future lies, and I promise it isn't as simple as you might think it is. So when the announcement came on Wednesday that Christian Horner had been removed from his positions at Red Bull Racing, many people saw it as a shock. However, I don't want to pat our own backs here at F1 Reverse, but we did predict it happening back before the British Grand Prix. You see, things for Horner hadn't been going well for a year and a half by this point, and they were only getting worse as well. His dismissal comes after months of declining form from the team and internal disputes at the highest level. In 2023, Red Bull had the most dominant season in F1 history statistically, where they won all but one race on their way to a first ever 1-2 finish in the Drivers' Championship, as well as obviously claiming both titles. Verstappen spent most of that season driving in a completely different class and winning basically every race by at least 30 seconds. It was pretty astounding to watch. However, despite the regulations not changing for 2024, Max Verstappen's almost 1 second per lap advantage over the rest of the grid was very short-lived. The RB20 was far too difficult to drive, and McLaren brought upgrades which allowed Norris to take a race win in Miami just on pure performance, something that was completely unthinkable 6 months beforehand. That wasn't all that was happening at the start of 2024 though, and it was a very tough start to the year for Horner. Along with his team's performance waning, Horner was accused of sexual harassment and coercive, controlling behaviour by a female employee. He was cleared twice of the claims, firstly after an internal investigation conducted by a lawyer, and then by another lawyer who dismissed the complaint's appeal. A folder of screenshots of messages which were reportedly from the team principal to his accuser was circulated, including the now infamous File 76. While Horner was cleared, it created problems within the team. First, there were the arguments that spilled into the public between Verstappen's camp and Horner. Max's dad Jos very publicly called for Horner's sacking, saying the team would explode if Horner stayed on. While Jos was the public voice of the anti-Horner camp, it was also believed that Helmut Marko was against Horner staying on, as was the Austrian board, headed by Oliver Mintzlaff. Fortunately for Horner, he was cleared of those accusations, and he had the time majority shareholder Chilem Uvidya on his side. With Uvidya on his side, Horner was always going to be relatively safe from dismissal. Now, I'll come back to those controlling parties in a second, because they're absolutely vital to everything that has happened and everything that will happen going forward. But first, let me just talk about what else has gone wrong since the accusations in 2024. While Horner survived the accusations, Adrian Newey decided that he didn't want anything to do with the team anymore, and he left for Aston Martin. Now, losing the most decorated engineer in F1 history was a massive blow to Red Bull and Horner, and the consequences have been painfully obvious on the track. Since he left, Red Bull's car has become almost undrivable for anyone but Max Verstappen. Over the past 4 races, Sauber have outscored Red Bull by 35 points to 29. This is the same team that was completely untouchable 18 months ago. Without Newey, the car's become a mess. And that Sauber team, by the way, that's run by Jonathan Wheatley, who was another to leave Red Bull in recent years. With their performance in the gutter, Max Verstappen's future is now being questioned. If reports out of Germany are to be believed, then Mercedes have given the green light to Toto Wolff to pay the estimated $100 million release clause in Max Verstappen's contract if it's needed to get the Dutchman to sign for the team. Even before Horner was removed from the team, Verstappen seemed to be on his way out, and now that Horner is gone, it's probably more a matter of when rather than if the move will happen. So to summarise, over the past couple of years, 18 months or so, Horner has lost key staff, including the sport's best ever engineer. The team's performance has completely nosedived. He's brought a massive amount of negative press onto Red Bull, and the best driver in F1 at the moment is on the verge of leaving. Now, while all of that is obviously bad, it was actually just all ammunition for the board to remove him. But the real reason that he's gone is because the board wanted more control. This is where those controlling parties at Red Bull come back in, and the future of the team becomes a little bit clearer. So if you cast your mind back to a time before Red Bull co-founder Dietrich Mateschitz had passed away, we can compare the team then to how it is now. Mateschitz took a huge leap of faith in Horner when he promoted him from relative obscurity to run his newly founded F1 team. It was a baffling decision at the time, but one that Horner more than repaid. His tenure lasted 405 Grand Prix, of which Red Bull won an incredible 124 of them. To give you some perspective on just how well Red Bull have performed under Horner, Ferrari during that same period of time have won only 65 races and secured 2 constructors titles and 1 driver's title to the 6 and 8 Red Bull have got respectively. Now, Horner did all of this with relative freedom from any outside interference. Mateschitz was quite happy to leave Horner to run the team however he saw fit. Helmut Marko would occasionally call to Austria to give him updates on what was happening or to ask for advice on a big decision or something, but he certainly couldn't be described as a hands-on co-owner of the team. When Mateschitz passed away in 2022, the management of Red Bull was quite quickly consolidated into the board of directors in Austria, which is run by Oliver Mintzlaff. Now, he and the board have a very different idea of how they want things run. Very quickly, Mintzlaff got very involved in Red Bull racing. Helmut Marko's freedoms as the head of the junior driver program and as an F1 advisor was very heavily curtailed, with Mintzlaff demanding regular updates on what was happening, as well as constraining Marko with an actual job title and role, instead of just allowing him to float around the business as a very well-paid somebody who did something. Marko, at the time, was very unhappy about it. In fact, he was so unhappy that his dislike of the situation became very public very quickly at the time. While the board did manage to get control of Marko, controlling Horner has been much more difficult, especially when he had the majority owners in Thailand backing him up. But that didn't stop the board from wanting more control over what happened at Red Bull. With Horner out of the way, they've got what they wanted, and they'll have much more of a say over what happens in the team going forward. This desire is backed up by statements from team members over the past couple of years, as well as a few other sackings which happened at the same time as Christian Horner was removed from his role. Now, Group Chief Marketing and Commercial Officer Oliver Hughes and Group Director of Communications Paul Smith have also been relieved from their jobs. Both were promoted from within by Horner in recent years, moving their jobs to the Red Bull factory. Both of them are well-known Horner supporters, completely through and through, and their removal by the board means that they can put people into those roles who can be more easily controlled by them. It could also mean a move of the less technical jobs to the Red Bull headquarters in Austria instead of allowing them to stay in Milton Keynes. Again, it's an easier place for the board to have some control over what's going on. So now you know the more complex than they seem reasons behind Horner being fired and what the board wants from the team going forward, we can start to understand how that will affect Red Bull in the future. But before I go into why this could be the end of Red Bull racing as we know them, if you're enjoying this video and you want to catch more of me and the Formula 1 news and analysis this season, then make sure to press the like button down below and subscribe to F1 Reverse. Thank you very much. It has to be assumed that Red Bull Racing's new CEO and team principal Laurent Mekies will receive far less freedom in his decision-making than Christian Horner ever did. It is quite a large change to how things are done at Red Bull and how the team is run, but is it a change for the better? Well, I think a really good comparison can be drawn with Ferrari here. Ferrari, very famously, have an over-involved board of directors whose interference in how the F1 team is run has been blamed for their relative stagnation into a team who are never quite good enough to compete for a title. Sure, they've come close a couple of times over the last 2 decades, but since Red Bull became a team in 2005, they've only won 2 Constructors' Championships and 1 Drivers' Championship. The 2 team titles came in 07 and 08, and it was Kimi Raikkonen who took the driver's title for the team in 2007. Since then, Ferrari have lost out to Brawn, then Red Bull, then Mercedes, then Red Bull again, and now McLaren, always claiming that a return to the top of the sport is just a season away. However, that's never actually come to pass. So what happened after 2007 that meant they were never really serious challengers again? Well, the biggest and most obvious shift in how things happen at Ferrari after 2007 was a change in management. That incredible run of dominance through the late 90s and noughties was masterminded by the Frenchman Jean Todt, with Michael Schumacher driving the car. The team was built by Todt. His hirings filled senior positions across the team, allowing him complete control over what was happening within Ferrari. He turned the team into the most dominant force the sport had ever seen at that time. When he resigned after the 2007 season, though, that all changed. Ferrari became a political swamp of interfering and competing priorities. Board members who don't know enough about the ins and outs of running an F1 team want their ideas to be implemented, and it just bogs everything down, stopping any team principal from creating a team that can function and excel in Formula 1. Too many chefs and not enough cooks is probably the perfect analogy. Sure, they've managed to be strong, but they're not the force they once were. Red Bull under Horner could be compared to Ferrari under Todt. They both had their star drivers. For Horner it was Vettel and then Verstappen. For Todt it was Schumacher. They both had their incredible engineer, which for Horner was Newey, and for Todt was Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn. Both had control of their teams, able to oversee everything that happened and make changes as they saw fit to ensure their teams were as good as they could be. With Horner gone and the board becoming far more involved, it shouldn't come as any surprise if Red Bull go the same way as Ferrari did after 2008. What Horner did at Red Bull was incredible. Don't let the recent history of the team tarnish his accomplishments. He will be remembered as one of the best of all time once the dust settles on his sacking. Without him, Red Bull are a weaker team. Red Bull have been a force to be reckoned with since they entered the sport, but sadly for their fans, this could be the end of Red Bull racing as we know them. But do you agree? I was George, you've been watching F1 Reverse, and please don't at me in the comments.